Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here on this gorgeous summer day. We are ready to begin by call to order. And roll call.
Laura Bellin,
Present.
Landon Moore,
Present.
Herman Covey,
Present.
Mark Garner,
Here.
David Harrington, David Holly,
Here.
Mark Munson,
Present.
Solomon Ashby,
Here.
Derek Challenger,
Here.
Shannon Glover, Elizabeth Gooden,
Present.
Cheryl Spivey.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Thank you. And we received our minutes last week, and I'll entertain a motion for acceptance or any questions that you might have or corrections.
I move we accept as written.
Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. We'll move right into the applications for retirement of deceased members.
There were no applications for fire, police retirement, or Portsmouth retirement. We did have one death benefit for Gregory Morissette with a survivor annuity. And active for fire is 14 participants and 15 for Portsmouth.
Thank you. Historic flow report. Ms.
This is on page 5. I'll begin on page 5. Run through the changes for the month of May. We had a beginning balance for the combined systems of $212,612,452. We had interest income of $45,622. Our administrative expenses for the month were $23,047. The return of benefits, so these are our return benefits that went back to John Hancock, was $3,162. The recurring benefit payments were $2,503,785. The employer contributions for the period, which is the full, which gets us to the full amount for the year, was $4,692,580. And we had a realized gain on investments of $242,912 and an unrealized loss of $91,633 for a net change of negative $6,734,168. And then when we add so that comes to an ending balance of $205,878,284 for the combined systems at the end of May. Any questions?
Ms. Spivey, you want to continue with the OPEB?
Yeah, I sure will. So on the OPEB, I'm going to read from page 10 in the packet. And this is the summary of assets as of the end of May. So the cost value for the amounts that are in the OPEB trust fund was $3,996,542 with a market value of $4,035,538,000. There was an additional $1 million made in the city's budget this year, so that contribution will be made later in fiscal 20 to the OPEB trust. And then as a reminder, we are not using the OPEB trust yet to pay benefits. So we're waiting for the OPEB trust to get to the full amount of the liability, the assets to get to the full amount of the liability before we begin paying benefits out of the trust.
What's the estimated time that you think that would occur?
I'll have.
Just
I'll have-
ballpark it.
I'll even to ballpark, I'll need to look into that further. We had the liability that was established a year ago, but I can't remember what the delta is.
Okay.
Didn't
Any other
create it
questions?
in 08 when we should have.
All right, and let's see. The OPEB follow-up?
Yeah, yes, the follow-up, is an email in the packet on page 13, and that was just a question that was asked about the April statements. There was a timing difference between, there was an amount shown as investments and an amount shown as due to broker. It was a timing difference where the money had gone into the investment part of the fund, but the broker had not yet received the money. So it had overstated the total balance by the $1 million. And that was the fiscal 19 contribution.
Is that your question, Landon?
Yeah.
Did that satisfy you? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Dr. Patton has a question.
Yes.
I would just like to say that in 2008, and you can speak to it, was the time frame that the city should have established its OPEB fund. But our coming on board in 2015 and realizing that the city had not established a fund, which we started in 18, we're moving in the direction that we could have 10 years ago.
Right.
And now we're just establishing it. So when Ms. Spivey gets that information, it's probably going to be a little while before we can get to the amount in there that will
Yeah.
be able to
I
pull
mean,
it out. But we would have
And I
it.
know you can't give me exact, but we're talking 10 years or 25 years?
Right, and that's why I just can't remember what the
Okay,
liability
all right.
was.
I
but-
mean, it's not
But I will, I'll get that out for the next meeting.
Right.
And
Thank
my
you.
apologies for not recognizing our city manager.
That's
Dr.
okay. I'm
Patton.
just
Welcome.
here. Thank you.
We appreciate you being here. All right. Several years ago, we had a presentation that identified challenges and opportunities and threats to our pension plans. It was done by Davenport and Company, and today we have an update.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, and I think
Kyle, I've gotten your last.
Loves.
Will now present us an update. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yep, and I'm going to sneak over
Thank
here by
you.
Dr. Patton. Thank you, ma'am. And Madam Chair and members of the Pension Board, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Again, Kyle Louse
Sit up,
with...
stand up. No, you've got one that's here. Go to the next one. please.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll do that. Thank you. With Davenport, the city's financial advisor, and again, we appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'm just gonna stand. So, I ended up sitting all day in a car behind a desk anyway, so an opportunity to stand up a little bit, stretch my legs.
You'll get to see.
So, appreciate the introduction there, and it has been a little while since we've been, yes, sir.
Good.
So, that's great. In front of your body, I think there's probably some new faces since last time we were here, and I think part of what we identified in that last report was maybe an opportunity to kind of revamp the makeup of the board. And so for some of you maybe meeting us the first time, but there's a little bit of background. We've been the city's financial advisor around about 10, 11 years, thereabouts. And what that really means is that we are focused with the city manager, with finance staff, with Mr. Ashby on sort of the holistic financial standing of the city, whether it's pensions or debt, fund balance, or financial policies. That's really our focus. And obviously with the history of Portsmouth's pensions, they take a maybe a little bit brighter focus than in some of the local governments, given the history that we've had. So what you have in front of you is a presentation that I'll walk through. Happy to sort of handle questions as we go here. But I think what we have is a little bit of an overview and also an opportunity. So as background, we'll start on page 2 in terms of the overview. So since 2013, which is when the city issued its roughly $168 million thereabouts in pension bonds, I suspect you're all very well aware of that, made significant progress in sort of shoring up the two closed systems. So at the time when we were brought in, we were at 28 to 32% funded, which was amongst the lowest that we were aware of in Virginia. And so we went through the entire process, studied things, and ended up issuing those pension bonds in June of 2013. That brought the funding levels up to about the 80% level, which is about where you'll want to be. Ideally, you're at 100, but really, sort of best practice is to be at about 80% in terms of the funding level. And so that was the goal back in 2013. I think to the chairwoman's comments a couple minutes ago, as a follow-up a couple years ago, we did a governance and review study and identified a variety of things in the sort of day-to-day operations, the policies, the procedures, the investment side of things that could be enhanced with the management of those pension funds. And I think from our perspective, the vast majority of those have been covered, so that's a good thing. So the day-to-day operational things, the investments, we're aware of, obviously handling those on a day-to-day basis on purpose. We're aware of those practices have evolved and really been enhanced since that 2013 time period. Also, to the prior comments in terms of the OPEB liability, as we think about things, again, as sort of a holistic financial advisor and really using the rating agencies as a proxy for the overall financial standing. The pensions are arguably probably the more important piece of the two between pensions and OPEBs because it's a harder liability. Mm-hmm. There's less ability to sort of change those over time. But the OPEB side of things has taken on a much greater focus really in the last 10 years. And what the city has done historically is, Dr. Patton was certainly accurate in setting up the fund. We're sort of behind in terms of doing that. But the size of that liability, I recall back in 2013, we were talking to the rating agencies, was something in the order of magnitude of $200 million. And that liability now is something in the order of magnitude of $20 million, plus or minus, don't quote me exactly on that number. So there certainly have been steps that have been taken on the OPEB side of things to bring that liability way, way down in the last 5 or 6 years. So that's a positive. But there still certainly is work to be done. So what we've been working very diligently on really in the last couple months, and it'll take up a vast majority of our presentation, is a strategy to figure out how we enhance the funding levels in our two pension funds. Talk a little bit about that, but for anyone that watches credit markets, watches interest rate markets, interest rates have come down a fair amount, even as much as we've been saying they've been low for the better part of 8-10 years. They've actually come down a fair amount in the last couple months. And so really what we think we have in the short run here, the majority of what we'll talk about today, is an opportunity to refinance the pension bonds for savings and use that savings to put into the pension fund and give a little boost to the funding. So to kind of foreshadow the rest of the presentation, that'll be the vast majority of what we talk about today. The bottom of page 2, though, what we have seen over the last several years is that 80% funding level has sort of declined. It's been eroding the last couple of years. It's a trend we've been watching. It's a trend the rating agencies have been watching. So if we start around 80%, it looks like where we are right now.
68, 67.
68, somewhere in there. We'll call it 70 plus or minus. And so that trend in longer term is worrying to us. Rating agencies will start to take more note of that. They've been comfortable thus far with the strategy and the pension obligation bonds and how that's worked out the last couple of years. But what we see that's a worrying trend is that gradual decline in the funded ratio. So if we were at 80, then in the mid-70s, fine, kind of get their head around that, give it some time. Certainly pension funds are long-term obligations. So we try not to make knee-jerk reactions, and they've been good about that, meaning the rating agencies. But I think a concern we do have is that gradual decline and how it is we're going to sort of stem that tide and bring the funding levels back up.
Now, Kyle, is that a direct result of the low interest environment?
What it looks like, again, we're not the actuaries nor the investment consultants, but what it looks to us is a combination primarily of a couple things. Number one, the pension funds, which use a 7.25 discount rate. And what we've seen is the investment returns have not been sort of meeting that 7.25. So that's a big piece of it. The other primary piece, it looks like, is some of the actuarial and demographic assumptions that go into all these numbers that the actuaries do. That also has sort of added to the burden. So again, we're not actuaries. You've got, John Hancock does that. That's their expertise, not our expertise. But as we look at it from outsiders, it looks like those two have been the big drivers in terms of investment returns not meeting that 7.25, and some of the demographic assumptions they use to project out how long people live and when they take retirement and those kind of things have not worked in our favor in terms of size and liability. So we flip to page 3. I won't read it word for word, but certainly I think it goes hopefully without saying that the status of our pension funds is going to take a greater focus from the rating agencies, again, given that we've got those pension bonds outstanding. So that's why we've been so focused on that. Good news here is that, as Dr. Patton knows and City Council knows, in June of 2019, so just a couple months ago, we were with the rating agencies, presented the city's overall financial standing, overall economic standing, and they affirmed all of our existing credit ratings. So the city has 3 credit ratings: Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. Those are the 3 primary rating agencies that rate local governments, and all those were affirmed just a couple months ago. So that is good news. As a follow-up to that, bottom bullet point here, we then entered the credit markets and sold roundabouts $24 million in public improvement bonds for CIP projects in the late June time period. And again, some good news here. Those bonds were very well received in the marketplace. Interest rate was well below what we had planned on. We also saw good sort of competitive bids from 6 or 7 firms that wanted to buy those bonds. So that said to us, the market is accepting, and there's a demand for Portsmouth bonds in the marketplace. So those two facts there, meaning affirmed ratings, good results with the bond sale, plus the fact that interest rates have come down, really have led us to be standing before you today talking about the pension bond reform, the hoped for pension bond reform. So you flip to page 4, and again, a little more background, we'll get into some specific numbers, but in essence, we see this opportunity, given that rates are lower and some of those other good news, to refinance the pension bonds, take those savings, and this is really important, that's why we've kind of put our little blue bubble here to highlight it, take any savings that are realized, which are not guaranteed, so it's going to be very sensitive in terms of where interest rates go, what those ultimate savings levels will be, if any, but any savings that are achieved, put those into the pension funds. That's going to be our strong recommendation. Dr. Patton knows this, Spivey knows this, that'll be our recommendation to City Council, that those dollars go directly into the pension funds and are not used elsewhere. And importantly, those dollars would be contributions to the pension funds over and above what is already budgeted to go in there. So basically, we'd be making, in essence, an extra payment. If you think about maybe you've ever had a mortgage, you have a good year, you get to the end of the year and say, you know what, I'm going to make an extra payment on that mortgage, pay the principal balance down a little bit. Similar kind of concept here. We're going to still make our regular annual payment, and What we're going to do is take any savings that we get, we're going to make like an extra payment, extra contribution in the fund. Yes, sir.
How you doing? So just so I'm understanding that correctly, what your recommendation is basically using the proceeds from a favorable interest rate climate to buy down the debt, basically,
If we can, yeah.
If we can.
if we can.
If we can, meaning the outstanding amount of the bonds, we're not going to change that. What we're
Sure.
going to do is we're going to take any savings. If you're, basically, your pension bond payments right now are about $11 million.
Yes.
The hope is, read this in a couple pages, we could save somewhere around $5 million in this upcoming fiscal year. And our strong recommendation is we take that $5 million and we put that right into the pension funds. So you've got your budget right now, $11 million to make a pension bond payment. Hopefully, that's only going to be about $6 million this fiscal year alone. So that difference, that $5 million, we stick it right into the pension funds. That's the recommendation.
Which would get us back closer to the 80%.
Does not,
No.
we'll show you that in a couple pages.
Okay.
Doesn't get us all the way there.
It just in conversation, and Ms. Spivey and I, if we had 60 or 70 million dollars,
That's right.
then we could move the target.
Right.
But we know that we don't have 60 to 70 million, so this would only begin
That's right.
showing good faith to our rating agencies that we're trying to do something.
Okay.
And the flip side of that is, if we're in a low-interest environment, we know we're probably going to have a continuing hard time to
Yes.
approach that 7.25%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which in turn, which also has been mitigated by the fact over the last 2 years, we've changed our risk management strategy to a more reasonable one. I think immediately following the bond sales, the board still had a great fear of losing capital, and the risk management strategy did not reflect the environment that we were in.
Yeah. I think to all those points, the hope is the refunding will certainly help. Any dollars we can get in there are going to help, but it's not going to fix the issue.
Gotcha.
The other thing over on page 4, where in 2018, which we called to council's attention starting in 17, but it wasn't until 19 that the new actuarials kicked in. That is going to impact this city far into the future. And those are federal regulations, and it's just dealing differently how you look at how many in the retirement, the expected life expectancy, whereas when I came on board, we were like at thinking that it would be 2089. Now it's so far out, expected 2097, almost into 80 more years from now. And keep in mind the number of people that we have in this system who are still in their 40s and aren't even close to retirement yet.
So it's a long-term issue to be analyzed and watched, and again, the hope is this moves the needle a little bit. It does not solve the problem. So let's make the rest of the points. So we'll start showing you some more graphics to kind of get your head around the numbers. On page 5, we have a history of the combined funded ratio for the pension system. So add the two of them together, here is our funded ratio. And so that graph on the left-hand side, if you're a visual person, I tend to be, you see in 11 and 12 just how low we were. That green line there is where we really want to be, 80%. We were down in the 30 plus or minus % range, which was just untenably low and makes you worry about really the viability of the pension system. And so 2013, we issued pension bonds, basically get to about 80%. Hang in there for a couple of years, and what is admittedly worrying is you take your eye over 2016, and we've just kind of blown that trend up, and you made it look a little bigger on the right-hand side there. And you see from 2015, we were in the 76% range, and we've seen this steady kind of step down in the years since that. And so we right now are just a shade above 70%, which again, appears to be, looking at actuarial reports, talking to your actuary, has a lot to do with investment returns not meeting a 7.25, the actuarial studies or the underlying assumptions used, sort of making it more difficult in terms of liability. I think the other piece we've understood from John Hancock is the way these dollars are averaged over time. So the investment return is not within 7.25, doesn't hit you all in 1 year. It gets sort of layered in year over year. And so as this next actuarial report comes due, is the next one, some of those losses that Ms. Spivey just mentioned will continue to get factored into the numbers. And so even if, say, we've got a great investment performance this upcoming fiscal year, we're still going to get drugged down by the fact that we didn't have such a great investment performance the prior years. We'll show that to you in the next couple of pages. So again, the refinancing, a couple bullet points. I'll just point a couple things out here. When we went out and borrowed originally in 2013, the interest rate, and these are taxable bonds, so it's a little different than the tax-exempt bonds we just issued for the CIP. And so interest rates can be a little higher on a taxable bond issue, and that's simply because of federal tax law. The all-in interest costs, so you think about the average interest rate on that 2013 pension bond is about a 4.08, which for a 24-year taxable financing is very, very low. And so that is working to our favor and has sort of helped in the aggregate here. Second bullet point there, the bonds we're talking about refinancing have an average interest rate of about a 4.37. So the next couple pages we'll talk about what we think that rate could be in the current environment and why that is. But long story short, we think that 4.37 could be somewhere in the 3% range, again, if markets hold here for the next 30 or 45 days. Importantly, we're not talking about extending the final maturity of the pension bonds. That's something we don't think we want to do. Keep the same final maturity, pay that liability down, so it's a balancing act here, but just lower the interest rate back. So you flip over to page number 7, give you a little perspective on why it is we're able to stand here and talk about refinancing these bonds. Mentioned a minute or two ago about the fact that rates have come down the last couple months. What we're showing in this graph here is the 10-year U.S. Treasury rate. So the 10-year U.S. Treasury tends to be kind of a bellwether in interest rate markets. A lot of things are sort of priced off of that 10-year Treasury rate. It's not exactly the rate we're going to borrow at, but it gives us a good proxy in terms of where interest rates and the credit markets are. And so what we've tried to highlight here is give you about a 10-year history of what that rate is, where it has been. And highlight there, you see that June 4th, 2013, that's the day the pension bonds were sold back in 2013. And on that day back in 2013, the 10-year Treasury was about a 214, which historically was a very, very low level. And what we saw immediately afterwards is rates kind of shot up there a little bit to something that felt like maybe it was going to get back to a more historical norm. You see from that little arrow there, goes back up to the 3% range, kind of bops around for a little while. And then into sort of fast forward 2018, again, we saw that 10-year Treasury in the 3% range. In the last couple months, really, take your eye all the way to the right-hand side of that graph. It's just a ski slope down. And so that 10-year Treasury rate, I just looked at my phone before I stood up here, it's about a 205 right now. So it's actually lower than what it was back in 2013 when we sold those bonds. And important disclosure from our standpoint, we don't control those rates. I think that obviously goes without saying, but I mention that because they can be very volatile. And so what we're trying to do with you, with City Council, Dr. Pat and Dr. Spivey, is move quickly in hopes that we can capture this low interest rate environment while it's here. Certainly it feels like we hope that rates hang in here for probably what'll be 30, 45 days to enable us to do that. But we obviously don't control that, we can't guarantee that, so we just need to make that clear to everyone. So that's where we are.
Ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Do municipal bonds price off of treasuries?
Taxables do. So tax-exempt bonds, the ones we just sold in June, price off of a different tax-exempt index. Taxable bonds price off of treasuries, typically.
And I guess there's, you'll get a 18-year treasury rate, and then there's some sort of spread.
Yeah.
Municipal
so
spread on
these bonds will basically be you flip to the next page on page 8, we'll have a 18-year final maturity, paid annual installments. So
It's amortizing?
Amortizing, that's right. So a lot of taxable debt works as a big
treasury
balloon
rate.
maturity at the end. Our loan is different, and it is structured like most municipal debt is structured, so it's an annually amortizing, kind of looks like a mortgage. We're paying P&I every single year in about level annual installments.
So, and the existing bonds are amortizing also. I was going to ask you how you're taking out the existing bonds since you don't have a call option. Is there some type of make-whole? You don't have any prepayment penalties or anything?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I'll get right to that as we go to page number 8 here. So we right now, when we issued the bonds, it was about 170 million, 169 outstanding, is now about 135, and so to your point, we're paying principal down on that loan every single year in the clip of about 5-6 million a year. In essence, kind of, it looks like a big mortgage. You're paying P&I every single year in fixed annual installments, and that's not optional. At the time, the final maturity of the bonds was 2037. We're going to keep that same final maturity. When we issued those bonds, it was a 24-year loan. We use that term loan, 24-year loan, fixed rate for the whole time period. And what we have now, given that we've obviously run a couple of years since 2013, is we'll have an 18-year loan. So one of the other factors that allows us to think about a refinancing is not only the fact that rates are low, but the time period to maturity, basically the length of the loan is shorter. So if you think about if you ever had a mortgage, typically the rate on a 30-year mortgage is higher than the rate on a 15-year mortgage. Same concept holds here. So not only are rates very low, but we have a shorter loan in essence by virtue of having paid down principal over the last 6 or so years. And so then you take your eye to the middle of the page there, which says call date of the PO. Just getting back to Mr. Moore's question there. These bonds were issued with what's called a 10-year call option. That's very typical in the municipal bond market. Basically means we have a 24-year loan. The first 10 years, in essence, you can't call those bonds away from an investor. The back end of that loan, basically year 11 to year 24, we can call early up into that 10-year call period date. And so when we issued the bonds, we had 10 years to that call. What we have now is about, rounding off a little bit, about 3.5 years to that call. And so what we're able to do is what's called advance refunding. And so we're able to go out in the marketplace, borrow enough dollars, again, through a bond offering, take that money, put it in basically an escrow account, a trust account, that then turns around and earns interest until that 2023 call date. It's called an advance refunding, and that's the, I'll call it, typical way that municipal bonds are refinanced in our world. And so the other important factor that is allowing us to think about and hopefully do a refinancing is the fact that the time to that call date is pretty short. The dollars are borrowed, they're put in that trust account, they're reinvested in treasuries, and those treasuries earn interest over time until we get to the call date. And so in an ideal world, we'd have a low borrowing rate and a high reinvestment rate. And so to get too far into details, but the shape of the yield curve is important too in terms of how we think of all this.
Okay, I have a question.
ma'am.
The February 1st, 2023 is the call date on the current
Correct.
loan.
Correct.
And, okay, so the 2023, so we're close 3 to the 5 year to
That's
where
right.
we can do something. So the timing is right to do something.
Yes.
To try to offset what we,
That's right.
okay.
That's right. That's right. And the way an advance refunding works is we go borrow the new money, we put it in that special escrow trust account. McGuire Woods basically issues an opinion that says the old bonds are paid off. There's
Right.
enough money in that account is verified. Those monies go off the city's books basically, and we're left with the new loan that would be the refinancing bonds.
At a lower rate.
That's right. Exactly right. you see there, you take your eye down, the amount refinanced, we expect it's going to be about $118 million. We've got the ability to basically pick the portions of the loan that are going to produce the greatest amount of savings. And so you notice that we've got 135 outstanding. We're only going to refinance, we think, about 118 million. And that's because we're trying to pick the bonds that produce savings and leave out of the refinancing the bonds that aren't producing any savings for us. So we've got that ability, that flexibility to basically pick the portions of a loan that are going to produce interest rate savings. You move your eye further down the page, you see that $5 million number. That is the estimated net savings given current market rates. We ran this just, today's Thursday, we ran this on Tuesday. The refinancing savings is about $5 million, again, if rates hold, and we're able to do this at exactly the current market. The estimated present value savings, you see a 4.3% number. Because anytime you think about doing advanced refunding in our world, and it's a city policy, it's also already in the city authorization, we want that number to be around 3% or higher. The higher that number is, the more efficient, the more savings the refinancing is producing. So the city council ordinance that was adopted when we did the public improvement bonds had a provision in there that allowed us to go out and do a refinancing for savings purposes if we were able to meet a minimum savings, 2.75%. So we're above that number at 4.3%. And we certainly hope we stay above that number. And that'll be dictated by what the markets are in the daily sale. So we'll come to City Council here in a couple of weeks to talk about next steps. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But this is the one percentage that the higher the number, the better in terms of that savings.
And that's just a 5 million divided by 118 million?
Basically, yeah. It's a way to kind of measure how efficient, so to speak, a refinancing is.
And you're only taking out a
108.
portion of the bonds.
Correct.
Some of the original bonds are going to stay outstanding.
Correct. So,
How are you realizing the 5 million up front?
yeah. So the way we're able to do that is we can basically set up the new loan so that your next payment, you being the city as a whole, your next payment would be, you have an August payment, August 1st, then you have a February 1st payment. We can kind of tailor the size of that payment such that if we were going to pay $11 million for the fiscal year,
Right, we pay.
we'll have a small February 1st payment. And then starting in the next fiscal year, we'll basically structure those payments to be around the $11 million level,
Yeah.
just like they were.
So you have a lower payment in this fiscal year. That doesn't necessarily mean savings.
It does. So if you were going to pay $11 million, you're only going to pay $5 million.
Well, I mean, the timing, I mean, if you're paying it next year, what difference does it make?
Well, so the aggregate, so that,
Get the money.
so you'll have that $5 million savings in FY 2020.
And then,
And then if you just simply go add all the payments up over the life of the bond issue, it's going to be $5 million less than when you started.
Okay.
So in some sense, it's as simple as looking at the total payments. If you were to look at maybe a mortgage over 20 years, and you said, all right, my payments over that time period are going to be some number, $200,000. What'll happen by virtue of doing all of this is that hypothetical $200,000 number on your hypothetical mortgage is going to go to something like $195,000. And that $195,000, we've got some ability working within the cash flows and the interest rates to time when that $5,000 difference, when that happens. And so what we've worked with John Hancock to figure out, and this gets to the next page, is when we want that $5,000.
And to me, being on the pension board, it doesn't really matter if you're going to put another $5 million in the pension. That's great. I'm just kind of asking these questions. I'm curious.
Yeah, no, and that's why we're here and why we're having the discussion. But in essence, from a budgetary perspective, if Ms. Spivey's got 11 million in the budget this year for payments on the pension bonds, the hope is if interest rates pan out, those payments will only be about 5. It frees up about 6 million that would be still paid out of the budget, in the pension funds instead of going to make the pension.
So is that 6 million then going to be an annual reoccurring payment made to the pension fund, or is that just a one-time payment we're intending?
One time.
So the rest then becomes a savings to the city moving forward?
And all the savings is taken up front. That's how we
I got it,
Get to
okay.
Yes, no,
That's right.
there's no new money.
And that's net of fees and everything?
Correct. Correct.
And thinking about Mr. Gardner's question, we have to make sure when this is explained to the public that there is no, it's easily when we do these kinds of things, we think the city has saved and the city's got some extra money. But in this process, we are refinancing and doing these things in order that what the city is responsible for, that they have the money to continue to improve this fund.
That's right.
And not that the city got a new extra $6 million they can do something with. And that's important, that as you're presenting and the questions are coming and people who listen to this on our channel can understand, because we constantly over the years have had, well, the city made $6 million on this deal, and we're not doing that.
No, and I think it's a great point, because by virtue of the fact that we're not at 80%,
You're right.
there's no extra dollars.
It's not.
By definition, if we're below that 80% funded level, there's no extra dollars when we talk about pensions.
Amen.
As we get to the end here, we'll talk about some policies we'll recommend the city put in place to sort of further solidify the fact that until we get to 80%, there's no extra dollars when we think about pension funds.
Yeah, the way to present it is that the city owes
A lot.
bondholders and they owe the pension fund, and what we would rather owe the pension fund less.
Yes.
That's right.
Uh-huh.
So, and I think to illustrate this maybe even a little bit more, if you flip to page 9, we asked John Hancock to do some projections, which are always couched in a lot of different, sort of numerical analyses that'll change over time. And still want to make sure we make the point that there's a lot of variables that go into calculating. But what they did for us is to look at the aggregate funded ratio of the two pension plans and do a little projection out 5 and 10 years. And you see those bars, if you're looking at page number 9, bottom right, the dark blue is if we had no refinancing savings, and all of the various assumptions they make when they run the numbers, those all hold true in the next 5 and 10 years, what happens to that funded percentage? And you see, if you're looking at the dark blue, you start at about 70%. You then actually go down over the next 5 years. Take your eye one column to the right. You go down to about 65%. And so even if we make our 7.25 investment returns and everything else holds true, John Hancock's projecting that our funded ratio is going to continue to trend downward over the next 5 years. It then, take your eye further right, is projected, again, using their numbers to come back up. But I think importantly, as we think about the investment returns and the fact those are realized over time, there's going to be a drag on the returns in the pension funds going forward, just by virtue of the history we've had. And so what we then asked them to do is say, all right, if we had the $5 million of savings, and we put that directly in the pension fund, what does that do for us in terms of that funded ratio? If 80% is our target, how much closer do we get to where we need to be by virtue of that refinancing savings? And that's in the light blue bar. So you start in 2018, right where we are, and then you take your eye one to the right. You see there it says 2023. And what it really gets us is about 2 percentage points. So absent the refunding, if we were going to be at about 65%, we're going to be closer to 67% by virtue of having that $5 million to, again, put into the pension fund, allow it to hopefully grow over time and bolster things. But it still is lower than where we are today. So Mr. Holly asked a question earlier, maybe with Mr. Munson, I apologize. Does this fix the problem? The answer is no. It helps the problem, but it doesn't fix the problem. You then take your eye all the way to the right, 2028, and you say, what does this do for us? It gets us about a 4 percentage point bump as those dollars hopefully compound over time, but it still does not get us to 80%. So this is going to be helpful, it's going to be meaningful, but it does not get us to 80% by itself.
These projections are based on a 7.25% return?
Yes, sir, they are.
Which is not going to happen.
No, these are based on Hancock's market forecasts. If we got the 7.25, it wouldn't look like this.
I actually think it's not quite right because the way they take the losses and average them in over time, they're assuming we make 7.25 going forward. What's dragging us down over the next 5 years is realizing some of those losses from past
years.
Oh, this is not market forecast. This is based on the 7.25. If we earn our expected return.
Yeah, what we've understood from John Hancock.
That's what it will be.
Okay, well
that's what they've said. So to the point, there's still some challenges. So page number 10, we'll talk about next steps. Top of the page, we're here today obviously talking with you, hopefully bringing you up to speed and answering any questions you have. The plan from here is we'd like to be in front of City Council on the 23rd, just here in a couple weeks, and have them sort of take any actions that need to be done, working with Patton, working with Mr. Ashby, and the bond council to make sure that's all sort of teed up, so to speak, for the 23rd, such the council can take the appropriate actions to make sure we can do the refinancing and solidify for the rating agencies that the savings will go into the pension funds, knowing that we need to shore those up. As a follow-up to that, we'll be updating the rating agencies. We just talked to them in June, so they're very fresh. They've heard sort of our latest in terms of financing performance. Doing that hopefully the balance of July. And really what we're targeting is to be in the marketplace with our refinancing bonds sometime in mid-August. Throwing all those dates and times up. Dr. Patton, Ms. Spivey, and everyone will be in the loop as so the hope is to move very quickly over the course of the next 30, 45 days.
What would be an interest rate situation in the marketplace that would cause us not to take advantage of this? I know you said it's fresh, we need to move now, but what's a point in which we can't do this?
Yeah, we've run those numbers, and it is pretty sensitive. So something in the range of a 15 basis point. So if you think about just mentally, if we're maybe at a 4%, just to use round numbers, going to around a 4.15% may sort of negate those savings. So it's going to be pretty sensitive, and that's why we're trying to move as quickly as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Kyle,
Yes, ma'am.
has Davenport given any feedback or consideration or review of the 7.25 anticipated return?
We have not, no. No, we benchmarked that 7.25 back in the governance study a couple of years ago with surrounding, both in your area and across the state, other pension funds, that tends to be sort of right in what I would call the average, not to use a highly technical terms, but it tends to be pretty normal for a local government pension fund to have a discount rate somewhere in that, call it 7 to 7.5%. So you're not an outlier per se using that assumption. If that's helpful in answering the question.
I believe is either Mr. Challenger or Mr. Ashby came back from a recent pension attorneys conference and kind of foot stomped that one. That was the prevailing assumption.
Yes.
So, on page 11 then, so a little bit broader in terms of next steps. A lot of work obviously has been done between investment, sort of the makeup of the board, et cetera. Some additional policies that we'd recommend to the city that we think about adopting. Again, a target funding status of 80%, get that memorialized in a more formal way by City Council, such that it is a adopted policy that we're going to get to 80%. And before we get to 80%, we will limit to the extent possible and hopefully entirely any COLAs that are given, as much as we understand. Certainly we want to give some of those things. There is an impact to the long-term sort of financial viability of the pension funds every time there's something like that given. So that's something we've talked about for a while, and we'd like to recommend that we look at again in a more formal way. And you see some of those other policies that we'd recommend the city think about putting in place with the City Council.
Can I ask a question
Yes, sir.
about the COLA funding? I'm sure you guys look at other municipalities and how they do those. Is that a trend of what's happening with other municipalities based on the funding of their retirement pension plans, that they do not look at providing those COLA offerings under the plans?
So what we tend to see is something that is formalized in that, at a minimum, we're going to study and understand the financial impact of doing a COLA. So that's the first step. What is going to be a little bit unique for our situation is, again, we do have the pension bonds outstanding. So if we were having a discussion and the fund was at 70% funded without pension funds and without pension bonds,
Right,
it would be a different type of discussion. We've got greater scrutiny by virtue of that.
Mr. Ashby.
Mr. Ash?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, and Mr. Challenger may be able to speak to this from a current standpoint, but the discussion amongst the retirement pension systems throughout the country, those that have fixed COLAs in their system, it is every year that they are talking about trying to wrench themselves out of those obligations because they create great angst in terms of the performance of the various retirement funds across the country from a municipal standpoint. That is a persistent discussion amongst us as pension attorneys. So to the extent that much larger statewide and those entities have those requirements and they're built in, we are constantly having discussions about what kind of, I don't want to say havoc it wreaks, but they are constantly having to have discussions about trying to reduce that expectation or adjust those down from where they ultimately ended up. So.
And I just wanted to, I'm sorry, Dr. Pat.
No, you go on.
I wanted to point out that if you look at the statutory language that gives responsibilities of this board, we have a responsibility to try to ensure that existing benefits can continue to be paid. We don't have a responsibility to expand those benefits.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
Yes.
Mr. Munson said exactly what I was thinking, and one of the things that, as city manager, I try to do is, I'm not just looking at my tenure here. I have to be conscious of where are we going to be in 2094 when there are thousands of people who will be impacted through families through this retirement. And so that's the mindset that we have to do what we must do, because as you know, across the country, pensions are changing and people are being impacted, and it's because of the cost of, as Mr. Ashby said, to try to keep these pension funds going. And so what we're doing here today in this discussion sheds great light on what we can do possibly now to keep and move and get where one day Portsmouth is at 90% or at 100 and have paid it off. That's what we want to do.
Thank you, Dr. Pat.
Dr. Pat, 2 points of clarification is we are not currently locked into COLA increases, and we do not have a history of funding COLA increases to the retirees.
No, we do not. Thank God.
Any other questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you, appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I requested this review because it has been a while since we had to update and we had some outstanding challenges, so.
Very much needed, very, very much needed.
So I appreciate Ms. Spivey arranging it, and it's timely. All right, and Mr. Challenger.
As we mentioned earlier, I attended the National Association of Public Petition Attorneys Conference the last week in June. We covered a whole bunch of different topics, everything from corporate governance to ransomware. But the one topic that I included in the agenda packet is in-kind contribution to defined benefit plans. And the whole point of this is using real property in addition to cash to reduce cash contribution to the plan and or to use the same actuarially determined contribution of cash plus real estate to improve the plan's funding status. In other words, we're talking about every year there's an actuarially determined contribution that the city is required to make to the pension plan. So other places, this started out in the private sector before it started moving into the public sector, in which, as opposed to the sponsor, in this case being the city, making a contribution solely in cash, that's also being made by real estate. So that is the focus of that. So first of all, under ERISA, which is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, an in-kind contribution to a plan is considered a prohibited transaction. However, ERISA Section 40748 provides a statutory exemption to permit plans to acquire and hold employer securities and real property, provided certain conditions are met. However, we're going to exclude securities because it's not relevant to our situation. And the other thing I want you to be conscious of, we are not governed by ERISA, but this is considered best practice anyway. The contributed property must constitute a qualifying employer real property, which includes real property and related personal property, which is leased by a plan to a plan sponsor or affiliates. There are certain requirements in order to do this. One is numerosity, is 2 or more parcels of real estate. Second, geographic dispersion, meaning we don't want to have the 2 properties located in the same area, because obviously if it's both in downtown, it could be heavily impacted because the downtown real estate value is going down. So they want it in 2 different locations. And then third, suitability for more than one use. So it doesn't have to be one use. So for instance, if it's an office space, can it also be used for a warehouse, for instance? ERISA requires also that immediately after acquisition by a plan of qualifying employer real property, the fair market value of all qualifying employer real property held by the plan cannot exceed 10% of the fair market value of all plan assets. Fair market value of the acquired real estate will be obtained by an appraisal. ERISA also requires that the transaction be for adequate consideration and no commission may be charged with respect to the transaction. Obviously, with respect to all of the ERISA requirements, as I said before, we're not governed by ERISA. In terms of the fiduciary considerations, one is the contribution prudent and in the interest of the plan participants and beneficiaries, the exclusive benefit rule. Two, is the plan paying more than fair market value for the asset? An initial fiduciary consideration is whether to vest the fiduciary responsibility for accepting an in-kind contribution with the plan trustees, here the retirement board, or an internal plan committee like the investment committee, or to delegate the responsibility to an independent fiduciary like John Hancock. There is no requirement under ERISA to retain an independent fiduciary in connection with an in-kind contribution. Another fiduciary consideration is whether the contribution is incremental to the plan or made in lieu to a minimum required contribution. In other words, if it's incremental, like for instance now, if we're making a contribution of real estate from the city to the retirement plan, and it's not part of the normal contribution, there is no fiduciary consideration because the plan is receiving something that it wouldn't otherwise receive. It only comes up if, as opposed to I'm making this number up, the $11 million contribution in cash, there is a proposal made by the city that we're gonna pay the $11 million in real estate. That's when the fiduciary consideration comes in, because obviously, under that situation, you have to look and see whether or not it's in the best interest of the plan to accept real estate as opposed to cash. Obviously, cash is king. So consequently, in order for that to happen, the best thing that the board could do is require a sweetener. In other words, if the actuary contribution is $11 million, for instance, that you require more money to be paid in real estate value than if it would be just cash. So that's a consideration. The way that this works in terms of the transaction is certain government-owned real estate holdings, such as office buildings, warehouses, would be contributed in kind by the government agent to its pension plan. Upon making such contribution, the contributing agency will be relieved of obligation to the pension plan to pay equivalent value in cash, and the plan will be credited with the fair market value of the transferred assets. The plan would own and manage the property and collect income from it from the transferring agency, would lease the property back from the plan at market rate levels, and nothing would change with respect to the day-to-day use of the property. So in this situation, but just using an example, there's a hypothetical office building that's in the city. The city contributes the property to the actual plan, and it's leased back. So consequently, there is actual a fair market value lease that's there for whatever the fair market value that should be for the lease. That's how it works in terms of its practical considerations. However, the plan, the governing body in this situation, the retirement board, will have a responsibility to look into one of the considerations being the liquidity of it. Obviously, one of the things that's required is to make pension payment, to make actual payments. So you have to make sure we have enough cash available in order to do that. Because obviously, if you have the cash, it's not an issue. But you have real estate, it's not happening at one time, it's happening over 12-month periods. So you have to make sure you have the liquidity in order to be able to do that. The other thing is I looked at is whether or not we're allowed to do this in the state of Virginia. For one, Virginia Code 15.2-1800 require that there is a public hearing before any interest in land is conveyed. The hearing will have to be advertised in a newspaper at least 7 days before the hearing. That's a requirement by law. Another requirement is cities may sell or convey rights in their public property only upon adoption of an ordinance of 3/4 of the governing body, in which in this case the city council, pursuant to Virginia Code 15.2 to 2100B. In other words, in order to even consider these things, those have to happen. There has to be an advertisement. It has to be advertised in the newspaper. 3/4 of the city council would have to approve of it in order to even consider it. So this is just a 30,000-foot view of something which I wasn't even aware of, in terms of that being an option to possibly improve the funding status of the retirement plan. And the only way that realistically improves the retirement plan is not just some formula of, of the cash and real estate meeting the same actually determined contribution that's always required. It's only if it's above and beyond what we're already required to do.
Prior to the transfer, would this sitting board here, or whoever's on the board, have the opportunity to decline that transfer if they so chose to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
And you saw the agenda packet. There's actually a scenario in which they play with different mixes of real estate and capital contributions. And obviously, for instance, you could have a situation in which that real estate that you're talking about, you wouldn't want to be bothered with. It could be there's environmental issues on it, like for instance, there's some type of toxic issue there, and then, the EPA is waiting at the door. You wouldn't want to be involved in that issue because it's probably more trouble than what it's worth, and more liability than what it's worth. But for instance, you had a property that was an office building, and it was fully leased out, and you didn't have those issues. That's a whole complete different consideration. But yes, there are many situations in which the board would say this is not a good idea. That's the reason why you had a whole sweetener piece, in which there's a negotiation back and forth between the governing city and the retirement board, and say, okay, we're coming from this from two different sides of the transaction. The city is looking for it, or the governing body of any municipality is looking for it from the standpoint we have a capital contribution that we're required to make. The reason why this comes up is because cities, states are having a hard time coming up with the contribution requirement. So they're saying, okay, we don't have the cash, but we do have real estate, so can we use that instead of the cash? So that's how this comes up.
But these cities that you're speaking of have real estate of which they are realizing significant monies from owning and realizing back.
Yes.
Okay, well.
Yes. So this is again one of the things that was discussed at the conference, whether it's applicable to us or something that we want to consider, who knows? But this is one of the topics that was discussed. I found it to be interesting.
Very much so.
So,
good.
Any other questions?
Interesting, I agree. The market of real estate is another roller coaster.
True.
That you have to manage the speed and descent and all of such to make it safe for your participants. Personal feelings, if the property is lucrative, it would have already been sold without going to the retirement board, and the city would realize those profits. Not saying absolutely no, but it's certainly stepping half of yourself over to another roller coaster and riding both at the same time.
But good report.
Thank you.
Good report.
Thank you.
Very interesting. It is real interesting.
I had not thought about that before.
We had a lot of information, and
About the old Mary Jane practice.
we move forward. I suppose the next steps for us would be to see what happens with the bond offerings, and then we'll see how that impacts us, and cross our fingers that the interest rates and all of those things that we need will hold until the bonds are sold or refinanced. That concludes our meeting today. Dr. Patton, did you have any other comments or?
No, I would just reiterate what Mr. Luck said, is that we have this schedule for our July 23rd meeting, which is our public work session before the city council meeting. Council will get an update, in just a brief update that this is coming through documents that they will get tomorrow. And we have our liaison here who will make a report back to the council. And we're just hopeful this can move, as we have all heard today, in a very smooth process that we can do what we need to do. But thank you.
And we're hoping that Ms. Spivey, Mr. Ashby, and Mr. Glover will update us in our August meeting, so we'll see what progress has been made.
Okay.
Is the council going to vote on that soon or something?
You mean what they present on Tuesday night?
Yeah, does the council have to
23rd.
approve the bonds?
Oh, yeah, all of that would have to come through council, yeah. Any kind of issuance, they have to give their go-ahead, and then through a ordinance that it
I mean,
will come.
as soon as, I guess, the bonds are approved, you could lock in the rate.
That's the goal. What, in the short answer to your question is,
If they're tied to treasuries, which I think you said they are.
yeah, so they'll be sold publicly. The action item we need is the ratings. So we need these to be rated. So that's why we're talking, working with rating agencies just now. So that'll have to get fit in there. You can't go sell 120 million of bonds without that rating. But once those ratings are in place, then we'll be ready.
Question, can that be done with city council with one reading, or does it require two?
No, those don't require two readings. It's only doing planning issues or two, it's one.
Yeah, planning is only has 2 readings.
Very good, so that would make it much faster then?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Good.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We'll see you in August.
Thank you.